What just happened in the last 48 hours should terrify every single American with a bank account, a retirement fund, or a job in this country. While the mainstream media is distracting you with celebrity gossip and political theater, a financial nuclear bomb just detonated in the heart of the U.S. economy. We are not talking about projections. We are not talking about fears of a recession. We are talking about a confirmed, sudden, and catastrophic blow that has wiped out over $40 billion from key American sectors in the blink of an eye. Beijing has just pulled the trigger on a retaliation strategy so precise, so calculated, and so devastating that Washington didn't even see it coming until the tickers on Wall Street turned blood red. If you thought the trade war was just about soybeans and steel, you are living in the past. This is a new kind of economic warfare. This is surgical, and the target isn't the government. The target is your wallet. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to expose the gritty, unfiltered truth that the White House is desperately trying to spin. I'm going to break down exactly how China just executed the most successful economic counterattack in modern history, why your cost of living is about to skyrocket again, and why top analysts are whispering off the record that the American economy might have just taken a fatal hit that we won't be able to recover from for a decade. The question isn't, will we go into a recession? The question is, how deep is the hole, and can we ever climb out? Let's look at the crime scene. Friday afternoon, markets closed with a whimper, but the real damage was done in the futures markets and global supply chains overnight. China announced a surprise implementation of what they are calling the anti-foreign sanctions countermeasures, but let's call it what it really is. A chokehold on the American consumer. You need to understand the scale of this. For months, the Trump administration has been playing a dangerous game of chicken, slapping tariffs of 60%, 80%, even 100% on Chinese goods. The narrative was simple. We are the biggest economy. They need us more than we need them. That was the gamble. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the bet just failed. China didn't respond with a tantrum. They didn't just blindly raise taxes. They waited. They analyzed our supply chains. They identified the weak points in our critical infrastructure, from the microchips in your Ford F-150 to the active ingredients in your prescription medication, and they squeezed. The $40 billion loss I mentioned, that's just the immediate write-down in value for major U.S. tech and industrial giants who woke up this morning to find their supply chain severed. But the real number, the number that will hit you at Walmart, at the gas pump, and at the car dealership, that number is in the trillions. It started with a quiet announcement from Beijing's Ministry of Commerce, just a document uploaded to a government server listing unreliable entities. But hidden in the fine print was a ban on the export of critical gallium and germanium processing technologies to specific U.S. partners. Most Americans have never heard of gallium, but without it, your iPhone doesn't work. Your LED lights don't turn on. The radar in your modern car fails. And more importantly, the advanced guidance systems in U.S. defense missiles become paperweights. China processes 98% of the world's supply. By restricting this, they didn't just tax us, they turned off the tap. The reaction was instantaneous panic in Silicon Valley and Detroit. Intel, Tesla, General Motors, their internal risk assessment alarms started screaming. Within hours, guidance reports were slashed. Stock prices for U.S. semiconductor firms plummeted, dragging the NASDAQ down into correction territory. $40 billion in market cap vaporized, gone. Stolen from your 401k and your IRA before you even had your morning coffee. But here is where it gets truly sinister. This wasn't a blanket ban. It was targeted. They specifically targeted industries located in key political swing states. They are weaponizing our own economy against our political stability. They know that if they crush the auto industry in Michigan or the tech hubs in Arizona, they create political chaos in Washington, and it is working. We are seeing reports right now from logistics managers at major U.S. ports, Long Beach, Savannah, Newark, that Chinese customs officials have begun enhanced inspections on American goods. This sounds boring, right? Wrong. Enhanced inspections is diplomatic code for "we are going to let your fruit rot on the dock." American cherries, apples, pork, and beef are currently sitting in containers in Shanghai, being held for safety checks that used to take 2 hours and now take 3 weeks. Do you know what happens to fresh produce in 3 weeks? It turns to garbage. That is billions of dollars of American farming revenue being thrown into the incinerator. I want you to think about the Johnson family in Iowa. We've talked about them before. Third-generation soybean farmers. They survived the 2018 trade war by the skin of their teeth. They survived the inflation of 2023. But they can't survive this. Mark Johnson told reporters yesterday, "We aren't just losing a customer, we are being erased from the map. China isn't buying from us anymore, not because of price, but because they have signed 10-year contracts with Brazil and Argentina. Those markets are gone forever." That is the key phrase, gone forever. The White House keeps telling you that tariffs are a tool to bring China to the table. They tell you that short-term pain leads to long-term gain. That is a lie. What we are seeing is a permanent decoupling. China isn't coming back to the table. They are building a new table without us. While our leaders are busy fighting on Twitter, Beijing has been busy securing supply chains that bypass the United States entirely. They have built a shadow economy with Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, the BRICS nations. They are trading in yuan, not dollars. They are buying energy from Iran and Russia, ignoring U.S. sanctions. This $40 billion blow is just the opening salvo. It is a warning shot. It is China saying, "We can crash your stock market whenever we want." And the terrifying reality is that our economy is far more fragile than anyone in Washington cares to admit. We are leveraged to the hilt. U.S. consumer credit card debt is at an all-time high of over $113 trillion. Savings rates are at historic lows. The average American has less than $500 for an emergency. So when China triggers a supply shock that raises the price of electronics by 20%, or clothing by 15%, or cars by 10%, who pays for that? You do. It is a tax, plain and simple. When the government says China pays the tariffs, they are insulting your intelligence. If a U.S. company has to pay a 100% tariff to import a part from China, they don't eat that cost. They pass it to you, every single penny. So when you see that made in China sticker or even assembled in USA with global parts, understand that the price tag is about to change, and not by a few cents. We are talking about inflation that makes 2022 look like a walk in the park. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to expose the gritty, unfiltered truth that the White House is desperately trying to spin. I'm going to break down exactly how China just executed the most successful economic counterattack in modern history, why your cost of living is about to skyrocket again, and why top analysts are whispering off the record that the American economy might have just taken a fatal hit that we won't be able to recover from for a decade. The question isn't, will we go into a recession? The question is, how deep is the hole, and can we ever climb out? Let's look at the crime scene. Friday afternoon, markets closed with a whimper, but the real damage was done in the futures markets and global supply chains overnight. China announced a surprise implementation of what they are calling the anti-foreign sanctions countermeasures. But let's call it what it really is, a chokehold on the American consumer. We need to dig deeper into the specific mechanics of this attack because the devil is in the details, and the details are horrifying. This isn't just about stock prices. This is about the physical reality of the American supply chain being dismantled piece by piece. Let's talk about the rare earth nightmare. I touched on gallium earlier, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Modern life runs on magnets, batteries, and chips. To make those, you need rare earth elements: neodymium, dysprosium, lithium, cobalt. Here is the uncomfortable truth. China controls the processing of 85% to 90% of these elements globally. The United States shut down its processing plants decades ago because they were too dirty and labor was too expensive. We outsourced our strategic survival to our biggest adversary to save a few bucks. And now the bill has come due. Defense contractors are currently in panic mode. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, the companies that build the missiles and jets that keep us safe, rely on these supply chains. Without Chinese processed rare earths, we cannot build the guidance systems for the Javelin missiles or the F-35 fighter jets. China knows this. They aren't just hurting our economy, they are degrading our national security, and it's trickling down to the auto industry with devastating speed. Ford and GM have already issued quiet warnings to their investors. The EV revolution, it's dead on arrival without Chinese cooperation. The batteries in electric vehicles are almost entirely dependent on Chinese supply chains. With the new tariffs and restrictions, the cost to produce an EV in the US just jumped by $3,000 to $5,000 per unit overnight. Inventory will pile up, factories will idle. We are already seeing temporary layoffs in Michigan. But let's look at the retail sector, because this is where you will feel it first. The Walmart economy is based on one thing: cheap imports. That era is over. Major retailers are scrambling to front-load holiday inventory immediately because they expect massive shortages by Q4. Imagine walking into Target or Best Buy 3 months from now. Empty shelves and price tags 30% to 50% higher. This is cost-push inflation. The Federal Reserve can't fix this. Jay Powell can raise interest rates to the moon, but interest rates don't print microchips or open factories. Let's go back to the $40 billion loss. Where did that money go? It moved. Investors are pulling capital out of American manufacturing and moving it to safe havens or emerging markets like Vietnam and India. But shifting a supply chain takes 10 years. We have a crisis right now. Let's talk about the tax that isn't a tax. The Trump administration says the Treasury collects billions from China. Technically true, but the checks are written by American companies. Here is the math. A U.S. importer buys a widget for $100. The tariff is 50%. The importer pays $150. China still gets its $100. The U.S. government gets $50. But the importer now sells that widget for $200 instead of $150 to make a margin. You pay the extra $50. It is a wealth transfer from your bank account to the government, using China as the excuse. And what happens when Sandra Martinez, the small business owner in North Carolina we mentioned in previous reports, can't afford the $150? She stops buying. She lays off her 3 employees. She closes the shop. Multiply Sandra by 30 million small businesses. That is the recession. It's your neighbor losing their job. It's the local diner closing because food costs tripled. The retaliation strategy from China is designed to maximize this pain. They know small businesses employ half the private workforce. By targeting the raw materials they need, they are hollowing us out from the inside, and they are doing it while smiling and shaking hands with the rest of the world. Beijing recently announced zero tariff policies for 53 developing nations. They are effectively creating a free trade zone that excludes the United States. While we build walls, they are building bridges. This weakens the dollar's status as the global reserve currency. And that, my friends, leads us to the most alarming part of this story, the currency war. China has begun dumping U.S. Treasuries. For decades, China was the banker for the United States. They bought our debt, which kept our interest rates low. In the last week, data suggests they have accelerated the sale of U.S. debt. If they dump their trillions in holdings, the value of the U.S. bond market collapses. Interest rates will skyrocket. This is the financial Pearl Harbor that experts have warned about for years. It is happening in slow motion right in front of our eyes. We have to talk about the dollar, the greenback. It is the only reason we can have $35 trillion in national debt and not collapse. But China's retaliation is a calculated assault on the dollar's supremacy. Look at the commodities markets this week. Gold is surging, Bitcoin is moving. Why? Because smart money smells fear. China and Saudi Arabia have been in deep talks about pricing oil in yuan, the petro-yuan. If the monopoly of the petrodollar ends, demand for US dollars evaporates. Trillions of dollars would flood back into the domestic economy, triggering hyperinflation. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to expose the gritty, unfiltered truth that the White House is desperately trying to spin. I'm going to break down exactly how China just executed the most successful economic counterattack in modern history, why your cost of living is about to skyrocket again, and why top analysts are whispering off the record that the American economy might have just taken a fatal hit that we won't be able to recover from for a decade. The question isn't, will we go into a recession? The question is, how deep is the hole, and can we ever climb out? Let's look at the crime scene. Friday afternoon, markets closed with a whimper, but the real damage was done in the futures markets and global supply chains overnight. China announced a surprise implementation of what they are calling the anti-foreign sanctions countermeasures, but let's call it what it really is, a chokehold on the American consumer. We are seeing the early tremors of stagflation, stagnant growth plus inflation. It is the economic cancer of the 1970s, but worse because today our debt levels are 100 times higher. The Federal Reserve is trapped. If they cut rates to save the housing market, inflation explodes. If they raise rates to fight inflation, they bankrupt the U.S. government and crash the banking system. China knows this. They have checkmated the Fed. And let's look at the housing market because this is where the trade war hits the American dream right in the face. Construction materials, steel, aluminum, copper wiring, fixtures are imported. The National Association of Home Builders has warned that the 2025 tariff regime has added tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of building a single-family home. But it gets worse. With the bond market instability caused by China selling treasuries, mortgage rates are staying stubbornly high. We are looking at a market where the average American family cannot afford the average American home. Inventory is rising, not because there are too many houses, but because there are no buyers. It is a frozen market, and when the ice breaks, it's going to be ugly. The American Action Forum estimates that these tariffs could result in 450,000 fewer homes being built over the next 5 years. That means the housing shortage gets worse, rents go higher, and homelessness increases, all because of a policy war that was supposed to help our economy. Now let's pivot to the tech sector again, the engine of U.S. growth. The S&P 500 is driven by the Magnificent Seven, NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft. These companies are dangerously exposed. Apple has spent decades building the most efficient supply chain in human history. It runs through Zhengzhou, China. You cannot move that to India overnight. When China hints at disrupting Apple's production or banning the sale of iPhones in China, Apple's stock takes a hit. And when Apple sneezes, your 401k catches pneumonia. Pension funds across America are heavily invested in these tech giants. That $40 billion loss in the last week, a huge chunk of that was retirement wealth, and the media is ignoring the shadow bans. There is a movement growing in China, encouraged by the state media, to boycott American brands. Starbucks, Nike, Tesla, sales in China are dropping off a cliff. This is soft power retaliation. We are permanently losing market share in the world's largest consumer market. The arrogance of Washington is assuming that the world must buy American. That is no longer true. Chinese EVs are now better and cheaper. Chinese phones are competitive. We are losing our competitive edge. And instead of innovating, we are trying to ban the competition. Protectionism never creates innovation. It creates complacency. Consider the Port Crane incident. Nearly 80% of the ship-to-shore cranes at U.S. ports are made by one Chinese company, ZPMC. The FBI recently raided ships delivering these cranes, fearing spyware. Now there is a push to replace them, but we don't make them. We have to buy them from Europe at double the price and wait 3 years. This makes our ports inefficient and adds cost to everything you buy. It is a death by 1,000 cuts. Every sector, every industry, every product is getting slightly more expensive, slightly harder to get. We need to talk about the debt trap and the nuclear option. I'm not talking about missiles. I'm talking about Treasury bonds. China holds roughly $800 billion in U.S. government debt. If Beijing decides that the strategic value of crashing the U.S. economy is worth the financial cost, they will do it. They have a state-controlled economy. They can absorb the loss. We cannot. If they flood the market with $800 billion in treasuries, bond prices crash and yields go vertical. The U.S. government would be unable to afford the interest payments on its debt. This would trigger a sovereign debt crisis, forcing the Fed to print trillions, making the dollar worthless. Is this likely tomorrow? Probably not. But the fact that a foreign adversary has a kill switch for our economy is the failure of decades of U.S. policy. Economists are drawing parallels to the 1930s. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 was meant to protect jobs. It did the opposite. It triggered a global trade war that reduced world trade by 66% and deepened the Great Depression. We are walking the exact same path. The Yale Budget Lab projects the U.S. economy will be persistently smaller due to these tariffs. We are shaving off GDP growth every single year. While we fight over steel tariffs, 20th century tech, China is pouring billions into AI, quantum computing, and biotech. They are playing to win the 21st century. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to expose the gritty, unfiltered truth that the White House is desperately trying to spin. I'm going to break down exactly how China just executed the most successful economic counterattack in modern history, why your cost of living is about to skyrocket again, and why top analysts are whispering off the record that the American economy might have just taken a fatal hit that we won't be able to recover from for a decade. The question isn't, will we go into a recession? The question is, how deep is the hole, and can we ever climb out? Let's look at the crime scene. Friday afternoon, markets closed with a whimper, but the real damage was done in the futures markets and global supply chains overnight. China announced a surprise implementation of what they are calling the anti-foreign sanctions countermeasures, but let's call it what it really is, a chokehold on the American consumer. And what happens to the American worker in this scenario? The blue-collar boom we were promised hasn't happened. Manufacturing jobs have actually fallen in the last 10 months. Why? Automation. Robots don't pay taxes and they don't buy houses. So we have a squeeze on the middle class from all sides. Jobs are precarious. Costs are rising. Asset values are threatened. So where does this end? What is the end game? We are staring down the barrel of 3 possible scenarios, and none of them are the happy ending Hollywood has trained us to expect. Scenario 1, the slow bleed. This is the most likely path. The tariffs stay. China keeps retaliating. The U.S. economy stagnates. We enter stagflation light. Growth is 0% or 1%. Inflation is 4% or 5%. Your standard of living slowly erodes. You don't lose your job tomorrow, but in 5 years, you are significantly poorer than you are today. The U.S. slowly loses its global influence as BRICS rises. It's the boiling frog scenario. We don't realize we are cooked until it's too late. Scenario 2, the crash. Something breaks. Maybe it's the bond market. Maybe it's a major bank failure exposed by commercial real estate losses. We get a 2008-style crash, but without the ability to bail it out because we are already $35 trillion in debt. Unemployment spikes to 10%. Housing crashes 40%. It is a full reset of the American economy. Painful, brutal, but perhaps it forces the necessary reforms. Scenario 3, total decoupling and conflict. The trade war turns into a cold war, or worse, a hot war. The global economy fractures into 2 blocks, the West versus the East. The internet splinters. This would cause a global depression unmatched in human history. Right now, we are drifting between Scenario 1 and Scenario 2. The $40 billion hit this week pushes us closer to the edge. Experts are screaming from the rooftops. The Peterson Institute, Goldman Sachs, the IMF, they are all warning that we are playing with fire. But the political train has no brakes. Neither party wants to look soft on China, so the escalation will continue. What does this mean for you? It means you are on your own. The government is not going to save you. In fact, their policies are the danger. You need to understand that the safe path, go to school, get a job, save in dollars, retire, is broken. The dollars are melting. The jobs are at risk. This is why we see the wealthy buying gold, buying land, buying assets that can't be printed or tariffed into oblivion. They are preparing for the storm. You need to look at your own exposure. Are you holding too much cash? Are you dependent on a single industry that relies on China? Do you have an adjustable rate mortgage? This isn't fear-mongering. This is survival. The rules of the game have changed. We are in a new era of geoeconomic warfare. The Johnson family in Iowa knows this. Sandra Martinez in North Carolina knows this. The auto workers in Detroit know this. They are the casualties on the front line. And soon, that front line will be your front door. We are witnessing the end of the globalized era and the beginning of the fragmented era. Everything will be more expensive. Everything will be more difficult. But here is the silver lining, if you can call it that. Crisis creates opportunity. Those who understand what is happening, those who see the truth behind the headlines, can position themselves to survive. That is why I created this channel, to reveal the states of the union that the media ignores, to show you the raw data, the uncomfortable facts, and the hidden agendas. If you found value in this breakdown, if you want to know the stories that CNN and Fox won't touch because it upsets their advertisers, you need to join us. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell. Do not let the algorithm hide this information from you. We are building a community of informed patriots who refuse to be blindfolded while our economy is dismantled. Share this video. Send it to your family, your friends, your co-workers. Warn them. Tell them that the $40 billion loss was just the beginning. Tell them that China has struck back and the war for your wallet has just begun. The next 90 days are going to be critical. We will be tracking the supply chain collapses, the inflation numbers, and the hidden moves by the Federal Reserve. You do not want to miss the next report. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant. Stay prepared. And remember, in an information war, the truth is your only weapon. I'll see you in the next breakdown. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to expose the gritty, unfiltered truth that the White House is desperately trying to spin. I'm going to break down exactly how China just executed the most successful economic counterattack in modern history, why your cost of living is about to skyrocket again, and why top analysts are whispering off the record that the American economy might have just taken a fatal hit that we won't be able to recover from for a decade. The question isn't, will we go into a recession? The question is, how deep is the hole, and can we ever climb out? Let's look at the crime scene. Friday afternoon, markets closed with a whimper, but the real damage was done in the futures markets and global supply chains overnight. China announced a surprise implementation of what they are calling the anti-foreign sanctions countermeasures, but let's call it what it really is. A chokehold on the American consumer.